All right, hello everybody and welcome to the Kendo UI R3 2019 webinar. I'm really excited to do this live in front of an audience. We have Alyssa here on camera and we have Eric a little bit off camera. He'll be popping in a little bit later, so no worries.
Or now's good too.
Or right here, yeah. So we'll be shuffling around a little bit, but what we wanted to do is bring you the latest and greatest in terms of what's new with R3 2019.
Woo!
So, a couple things that I want to mention before we go ahead and get started. Everything that we're talking about here is available on our What's New pages. So if you haven't checked that out, this is just a quick little screenshot of what that might look like. Essentially, it goes through everything that we cover from Angular, React, jQuery, and Vue. So everything that we talk about today will be available there. An additional thing that pops up as a question constantly throughout these webinars, and I want to make sure that we address this up front, everything will be recorded. So what you see here today, you'll be able to see on YouTube. So we have the Kendo UI YouTube channel that allows you to be able to catch up on this webinar and previous webinars, as well as a lot of other video activity that we have going on. So if you have to jump out a little bit early or you miss your particular favorite section, don't worry, you can catch up on the YouTube channel. Now, how you get there, it's really easy, youtube.com/KendoUITV. Also, throughout this webinar, you might see that on the right-hand side of your screen, you have a little interface that allows you to type in questions to us. And we're also actively checking Twitter. So if you have any questions for us at all, you can use the Twitter hashtag, #HeyKendoUI, and we'll be able to address your questions, hopefully either live here on the stream or through Twitter. We have a ton of people helping answering questions, and that's a great way to engage with us outside, of course, of the question chat box that you have within your webinar interface as well.
Yeah, reach out. We want to hear.
Exactly. We do. We do. So let's talk about a couple quick highlights of what we have for R3 2019. Starting off first with Angular. We have Angular 8 support officially. That's always exciting for the people keeping up with the latest and greatest within Angular. And we have a new drawer component. We have a new date time picker component, which allows you to combine both the date picker and the time picker into one component. We have a progress bar component. And then we also have a big feature request that's come through in the past with virtualization available in all of our dropdowns. Now on the jQuery side, we have a new timeline component, which is exciting, a new card component, a filter component, which is standalone outside of the filtering interface that we've had so far in some of our components, as well as a new rating component. And on top of that, we've done a ton of accessibility work to ensure that our components are as accessible as possible.
There are so many new components this release.
I know.
It's incredible.
Across everything that we have. It is. I'm super proud of what the teams have been able to accomplish, and I'm excited that we can bring that to everybody here. Yeah. And to continue the great list, we have React, of course, where we have a new scheduler component, a tree list component. So those are two very big components. We have the color picker and associated components alongside with that. We have a standalone pager, and for the grid, we added a footer row feature. So this is just everything at a very high level, and of course we'll jump into some more specifics. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to Alyssa, who's going to cover what's new in Kendo UI for Angular.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm Alyssa Nichol. I'm the Angular developer advocate for Kendo UI, and I am super pumped about this R3 release and the updates. So I love the Twitters, so you can either, like Carl said, shout out in the chat, or at Alyssa Nichol at Kendo UI, and then it was hashtag #HeyKendo?
#HeyKendoUI.
#HeyKendoUI is the hashtag. So please reach out. We'd love to hear from you either during the webinar today or later on whenever you're using our product and you think of a new feature, which we'll talk about our feedback portal in a little bit. But yes, let's jump in. So like Carl said, these are the highlights that I'll be going over today for the Angular release, and we're just going to go straight into it. So support for Angular 8. Oh, there it is. Look, I found my other screen. You think we can change that?
Nah, you'll be fine.
We'll fine. All right. Sorry about that. Got distracted. So yes, support for Angular 8. With the latest packages, Kendo UI, we are now compatible with Angular 8, and we have been working with the Angular team hand in hand so that we can support the upcoming new rendering engine, which is called Ivy, which we're going to go ahead and jump to that slide. So yes, Ivy, as of the current version, is out. You can toggle it on with a flag, and it's a -- enable Ivy flag whenever you're generating a new app with the CLI. or in your Angular compiler options, you can say enable Ivy set to true. And so we're super excited about the new rendering engine. I know Kara Erickson's been working super hard on it, as well as the rest of the team. And so you can test it out right now, but we are working hand in hand to make sure that once that rendering engine is live, us and our components are good to go live with it as well. So yes, the new rendering engine support for Angular 8. Let's jump into components. So the first one I wanted to talk about is the drawer component, which is so super snazzy. I was so excited about this one. So it's a dismissible panel for navigating in a responsive web application. And so as you can see in the little GIF of the component on the screen, it's basically you've got your hamburger and it can expand and collapse this panel, and you're changing the content that's on the screen. And there's a ton of features that come along with it. So we're going to go ahead and jump over to the browser and play around with it for a sec. So here in the browser, are we seeing it? We're good? Awesome, beautiful. So here I've broken out the CSS and the HTML into their own files because I'm a nerd like that. So we have our app component CSS and our app HTML, and then we have our main component file here. And then I think that is all we need to see. So I want to jump over to the HTML and show you this with the, scroll down here, it's the Kendo-drawer. And inside it we have these items that we're passing it, and we have select, so on select is going to go ahead and toggle through each of these panes. And then the mode, which is the first one that I want to talk about. So if we click on this hamburger, we see that the drawer itself, by default and by what I've set it, is overlay. But you can actually change it to say push here. And that is going to go ahead and push or slide the content aside. I know, it's like so nice, right? There are a couple other little flags that I wanted to talk about as well. So there's the display mode with overlay and push. There's also interaction modes, which we can set expanded, and we can set that equal to true or false. And so that's just going to be for like an initial state, right? When your user comes to this page, what are they going to see? Is it going to be expanded? By default, true or false. And so that's a nice flag to have. There's also positioning, which we can set position, and that one is similar to how Flex uses like the words start and end. So you can go ahead and set it to start, which is what is by default, and that's going to be the left-hand side of the screen. But end, of course, is going to go ahead and plop it over to the right-hand side of the screen if I can spell correctly. Did I do it right? Hang on. Position, start versus end. I love doing it live. Yeah, it's not a string. I told Carl at the beginning, I was like, if I mess up, just say something, something string, and it'll.
And I saw a string, so I said it's perfect.
But yes, position equals end is going to go ahead and put your drawers, which they're going to work the same way. It's just going to be on the other side of the screen. There is also a mini mode, which I think it's mini. Is it mini? Hang on, let me see. Let's see. True. Let's see. Yes. So mini mode is basically when I collapse, don't collapse me. And I'm going to actually put it back over to start because I want it over on the other side. But basically, instead of collapsing completely, it's going to be in mini mode, which is just showing those icons over there on the left-hand side. And of course, you can click your hamburger to get back the full view. So yeah, I'm super excited about the drawer component. I want to head back on over, press play. So yes, we talked about some of them, like with the display mode, interaction, positioning, and there is so much more. Head on over to our docs. They're super shiny and wonderful, and they will go into further detail than I did. Date time picker component. Yes, so this component combines the best of both worlds. You now can have it, right? Your date picker as well as your time picker. And you can see in this GIF that I'm toggling back and forth between the two. So if you select a date, it's going to go ahead and slide you on over to time. But unless, of course, you're on the perfect date, and then you can jump on over to time and then set it, and it's going to populate that for you. So yes, check out that component with all of these incredible features that we do not have time to jump into, but I wanted to go ahead and show on screen. The next one is the progress bar component. I'm super pumped about this one. Sounds super simple, but it's something I think has been asked for, and it's actually really handy, obviously, in providing feedback for your users, for your UI. So our new progress bar can be implemented as a standalone widget or tied closely with our other components, and we're going to go ahead and see those. It comes in two wonderful flavors, chunky, or a regular, right? So we have the normal progress bar on the left-hand side, as you would expect. It's loading with a smooth transition, and then the chunk progress bar, which is in chunks as you go. And you can set that to be with an updating value or with like a predetermined value. So yes. The scheduler component. Oh, do we have any, are we okay on questions so far? I wanted to stop and make sure there's nothing so far.
Yeah, we are good on questions.
Awesome.
We'll continue to kind of roll through here, and then we'll see.
Wonderful.
We'll
Yeah,
do some little Q&A at the end of the Angular
awesome,
session. Yeah,
awesome.
let's do it.
So yes, get your questions in now.
Yes,
once
please
we
do.
hit the end, we will go over them. So the scheduler component. So that one has been out under a beta tag, but it in R3 has been released officially. And along with it dropping officially for release to market, we also have keyboard navigation and accessibility compliance with the new version. So you can see in the GIF just the example of our scheduler component. But please check that out if you haven't yet. It's a really, really neat component with so many features for days, essentially. So, our editor feature, yes. So the next couple of things I'm going to mention aren't new components, but they're existing components that were given new features. And so our editor, which we already have, was given an insert table tool, which has been requested, or so I hear, by the masses. So yes, as you can see on the screen, you can go ahead and pop in a table and start editing it right away with our editor tool. So that's very exciting. The next one is the grid feature of aggregates. So it's a group header aggregate feature to the Angular grid. And it gives you access to calculations like count and sum across all of the columns available on the grid. And so I didn't know if you wanted to say anything on this one specifically. But
yeah, sure. So as you can see in the screenshot that Alyssa has here, we have both a count and an average in the footer of the grid as well as the header of the group. So this is essentially another way for you to be able to get access to the information that's currently available in the grid, or even if it's potentially something on the server side they want to pull in some information about, right? The idea here is just it gives some more context both in the footer and the header. So this is a big thing that we see a lot of requests coming in for the grid. So excited to bring it in for this release.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the next one is also a grid feature. So it's grid columns, auto fit column or columns. So if you go to our docs, it talks about both of these, but I wanted to go ahead and show, it's basically just setting resizable to true, and so that your columns in your grid are now going to auto fit to the content that they have without wrapping. Is that correct? And so it's basically, I want to take up all the space that I should be taking and no more. But yes, so check that out. A wonderful new grid feature as well. The next one, virtualization for our dropdowns. So excited about this for the Kendo Angular UI dropdown. And as you can see in the GIF, it's this dropdown has so much data going on, and it's just virtualizing. I'm assuming it's like virtual loading, right, where it's unloading and loading what it needs to as
exactly.
it scrolls.
So it doesn't really matter how much data you're tossing into the component. It's not all rendered at once, which saves on quite a lot of. It's a heavy resource-intensive thing to render all those elements. So being able to contain those within their dropdown and scroll through them more or less as smoothly as we can see here, right, in the GIF. It just is a great performance for the component.
Performance is such a hot topic right now in the Angular community, and especially as we're moving into Ivy and things being rendering differently, I think it's just really exciting that we're kind of jumping the gun on this one, and I love that we got this one in this R3 release. The next one is a toolbar feature, and it is basically adding responsiveness to our existing toolbar. So it allows you to hide available items into a drop-down as your toolbar needs to shrink in size. And so I'm going to go over to the browser and show that off real quick. So here we have, over on the left, in the stacklets, and all of this, of course, is available in the docs, so please check those out. But we have the stacklets here with our toolbar, and over here on the right-hand side is the toolbar. But as I expand it, you'll notice that more tools in our toolbar are populating, and then as we collapse it, they're disappearing, but they're not actually going away. They're still available to the user. They're underneath this drop down here over on the right-hand side. And so I believe these are just collapsing based on your toolbar button groups. So you can use that to kind of think through, okay, at this screen size, I would really like to prioritize these tools, but these can be collapsed. And so you can kind of group them based on button group to go ahead, and as you can see, I go smaller, and then it'll pop those down based on group, and then pop them back in. But yes, I want to show that they are all still there. If you get super tiny, which I guess you could show that on a watch. But yes, so that is our toolbar feature. I am so sorry I went through all of this super fast, but I wanted to stop and take a minute. We here at Kendo UI, we know that you have so many tools to choose from, like so many different libraries and component libraries that you can pick, and we want to take some time and thank you for choosing us and for going with the Kendo team, and we love you all so much, and we want to hear from you. If you go to feedback.telerik.com, if there is an existing component that we have that needs a feature, your team is really missing something, we want to hear about that. Or if there is an altogether new component that we don't have, we want to hear about that. And so yes, please head to feedback.telerik.com, and that's going to give you our feedback portal, and you'll go into the Angular stuff and just send us a note, and we really, really do listen to those.
Yeah, a lot of the feedback that we have in terms of the components that are coming out this release, the features that we're addressing, all stems from feedback from our existing customers, and even people that took a look and maybe decided that it wasn't for them, right? So we listen to feedback very intensely, and it's one of the reasons where if you look into some of the different flavors like React, Angular, jQuery, they evolve a little bit differently over time, and that is 100% dependent on the actual audience that we have for those particular JavaScript frameworks and libraries, and what they need, and kind of where they are, I guess, in their lifespan.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, I do have to ask, was that young gentleman there?
Yeah, Mr. Milks.
Browsing our demos on that iPhone? I hope that's you're starting him early.
No, absolutely, absolutely. We're starting him young. I'm sorry that I missed the last release. I was away. I like to use my Angular joke, creating my child component. Oh yeah, that was bad. I know, mom jokes. But no, he is 6 months old now, and I'm so happy to be back. But he also gets to go with me to a lot of conferences, and so I hear a lot of people joking about he's the youngest developer. So yeah, you gotta start him young. But no, seriously, thank you so much, and we love you guys. So yeah, I think now is a good time for questions if we have any.
Yes. So one of the questions that popped through around when you were talking about Angular 8 and Ivy specifically was if we are officially Ivy compatible, and we're not quite there yet. There are still a couple of items that we're working actively with the Angular team to ensure that we can work through to once everything is official with Ivy. Since, correct me if I'm wrong, Ivy right now, like you said, it's a flag, so it's not enabled by default, right?
Yes, but you can enable it in your Angular app today as long as you're up to date, but it is not on by default. So there's a little bit more work to be done, and I think we know about the issues, and we have made our pull requests, as you say, and I have no doubt they'll be ironed out very soon, and I'm super excited about it being launched for reals. So
yes, so this is very exciting. So if you're hoping that you'll be able to try it out today, not quite there yet, but we are actively working with that, of course, and we're excited for the Angular team just in general to get Ivy out there. I mean, it's been teased for so long, right? So it's nice to be able to.
But I was talking with Kara though, and I know they're putting their heart and soul into it to make it. They really, really don't want developers to have a hard time transitioning, right, from any of the versions. And so I know it's painful waiting, but I'm really glad they're spending the time that they need to make sure that all of these use cases are taken care of. So
yes, excellent. Excellent. All right, a couple other questions. I'm looking through my screen here to see what we have available. So one of the questions was if lazy loading works along with the virtualization of the dropdown, and that's a great question. So essentially, virtualization should work both in a server-side capacity as well as a client-side capacity, where if you've loaded all your data, of course, on the client, it's all available. If you have something on the server side, there will be essentially a page request that happens. And depending on your network connection, of course, that could lead to maybe a bit of a loading section in your dropdown. But either way, it is certainly possible. Now, something we should note as well, we talked about the drop-down component. We showed up one of them, but we have a lot of different drop-downs, right? We have the combo box, got the autocomplete.
And this virtualization is for all of them?
Exactly. Yeah, it's for all of them. Yeah. Great follow-up question. That's why I have you here. Yeah.
I'm saying this works for all of our amazing drop-down components.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
All right, let me see if there's some other good questions in here. So some folks are asking if these drop-downs in the virtualization also work in IE 11, and if that's improved the performance in IE. So we do support Internet Explorer, and IE 11 should certainly see some performance boost coming out of this virtualization as well. Since we know it feels weird to call IE 11 old in one way, because I remember, still folks asking about IE 6 support. So, it's been some time ago. But yeah, even with some of the older browsers, hopefully I don't offend anybody with that, you'll still be able to take advantage of some of this functionality.
Is 11 evergreen? Is it part of the where it's constantly updating, or no? I'm not sure.
IE 11 is in a stage, I believe, of asking for migration over to Edge. It's still there, but it's getting phased out. Let's say that.
Okay.
All right. So let's see if we have some other good questions that have come through here. We actually do have a lot here. I see some people talking about the accessibility features that I mentioned in jQuery. That actually is something that I cover in a bit, so we don't have to necessarily jump on that quite yet. One question came through around the accessibility of the scheduler. So I guess maybe that's a good time for us to talk a little bit about accessibility in general. With accessibility, what we mean by supporting something through accessibility is that we have, it's not really Section 508 compliance anymore, because that's officially now routing to WCAG 2.0, but we have WCAG 2.0, actually more or less 2.1 support as a part of our accessibility. And of course, keyboard navigation is a big part of that, so that's why we focus on this feature for this particular release. We follow the Y ARIA, so WAI-ARIA. I can spell, I'm proud of myself. And we follow that as a rendering standard for us when it comes to accessibility. So that allows us to be able to ensure that all of our components, as they are officially released, and the scheduler has had a couple of releases under its belt, but these are kind of the last two big features that we needed to ensure that it doesn't have the beta tag associated with it anymore, and it's out releasing in the wild.
That's something I love to do, is to take our components in an up-to-date Angular app and to use ChromeVox. So I don't know if any of you have ever used that. It's like, it's a way to test your accessibility. It's a screen reader for Chrome, and it allows you to go ahead and use the navigation that you've set up with the ARIA tags, and just with the semantic HTML and with our components, to go ahead and see what it's like to navigate through with only the keyboard. And so that's really cool and something I love. So check that out and test it out for your users. Definitely good.
And definitely one thing I should mention, our components are accessible, so adding them into your Angular applications, of course, help with the level of accessibility. Still on you to do more with accessibility, though. We can't cover absolutely everything, and how our components are used within your application can also, of course, need a little bit of extra glue, but accessibility is important to us. It should be important to you as well, and at least this gets you part of the way there. Depending on how many of our components you use, could bring you a lot of the way there, but there's, of course, a little bit more to be done. I like to throw that out in there just to make sure that people are aware that they shouldn't double check that. But ChromeVox is one quick way to be able to do some accessibility testing, and there's, of course, a ton of other tools out there.
And it's really eye-opening, because you're like, just simple things like using, I talk about semantics, but like that you don't have a ton of divs wrapping everything, and that you have like, oh, this is actually a header, or this is a section, so that Chrome Vox or other screen readers know how to navigate through your content and know the hierarchy off the bat. So yeah, it's definitely, you're absolutely right. It's on all of us as developers. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I have some questions about the roadmap, so people aren't 100%. Maybe I should say they're so excited about the product that not only are they interested in what we just released, but they want to see what's coming out next. And that's something that I'll address actually at the end of kind of the entire session. So if you're only here for the Angular section, of course, we have the public roadmap that you can check out that's up to date. We continue to, of course, tweak that as we go along outside of the release as we start developing more and more. And then you, of course, also can follow the recording after this, right, to jump to the roadmap section. But if you're interested in what's coming out with the next release, we do have some resources available already today that you can check out, or of course you can hang out, check out the rest of the webinar, and then be around for that section as well.
Not to put you horribly on the spot.
Sure.
Do you know the roadmap URL or how to get there?
Off the top of my head, so
Sorry.
I wouldn't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But if you go to either KendoUI.com, still routes there, or telerik.com/kendo-UI,
Okay.
You can get to the roadmap page for the top navigation,
Okay.
and then that will give you access to the roadmap.
Awesome.
Yeah, and also that's where you find the what's new, any additional release notes. You can find that as well. The roadmap kind of depends a little bit on the link is kind of universal. You'll be able to swap out like Angular for React
nice.
for everything like that. So, but you definitely tested some of my memory to see if I can remember off the top of my head.
Okay, all right, you keep going.
I remember a lot of things like numbers and combinations and stuff like that, but all the URLs are a little bit tough. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, perfect. Well, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the next section, which is going to be talking about jQuery. So, and that's actually me. So I'll go ahead and Kendo UI for jQuery.
Beautiful.
Perfect. So with Kendo UI for jQuery, as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, we have a couple of new components, and they are all pretty exciting if you ask me. So we have the new timeline component, which is very unique, and I love to show off a little bit more about what that component is all about. We have the card component, we have the filter component, the rating component, as well as overall accessibility improvement. So rather than me just talk over this, let's go ahead and jump into first talking about the timeline component and seeing what that looks like. So here we have a little bit of a GIF that shows off exactly what you can do with the timeline component. So you can display a bunch of events essentially across a particular time, and that's 100% up to you how you want to go ahead and set up this timeline, right, and when you want the events to occur. But what we see in this GIF is that not only do you have control over what is displayed in a collapsed state, you can either have them collapsed by default or expanded by default, but these events can then have additional information like images, you can have some content in them, of course, and you can even have buttons at the bottom that allows you to be able to go through and have some additional action on that particular item, whether it's linking to the next section of your application or to some other kind of, some other page within your application. You cannot just work within in a horizontal mode, but you also have a vertical mode like you saw there. So here we can check out the horizontal view with an item expand that actually takes up more of the screen. So depending on what you're looking for, whether it is having this larger item, right, which shows off a beautiful building here, right, and allows us to take up the entire screen real estate. You could work with kind of resizing this if you'd like to as well. This just happens to take up all available space. What you might also see is on the left and right-hand side, we have the ability to navigate through the timeline as well, so you don't necessarily have to be stuck with whatever's just displayed in the view currently. If you have a long history with a lot of different events that you want to be able to highlight, you have that capability as well. Something that I like, and you notice this here, is that we have the 2007 and 2008 little essentially tooltips that are there permanently, so that gives you some more context in terms of where you are with the overall timeline, right? So it doesn't have to be that, oh, we have this random event in 2007 and 2008. You can actually get a clear-cut view of when a particular year happens. Now, I will jump into all of these components in kind of one single demo, so let me go through them all within these slides that I have here, and then I'll go ahead and show you what the code looks like for this particular component. But moving from the timeline component, we have the card component. And this is, in a way, as simple as it sounds, right? In modern user experience, we have a lot of design languages that come up with the idea of a card component. So what that means is what you see here. These are two separate cards, one about Rome and one about Barcelona, and they have a couple of different layouts so you can kind of see how they can behave in different ways with similar content. So all it is the title section, the image, and the content, and you can also have buttons. Now this can be more, this can be less. It just depends on what you're looking to do within each individual card component. So it truly is a layout component of sorts, right, that allows you to define either through your own CSS, you want to be able to lay out your application using these cards, or you could potentially integrate this into something like the Kendo UI list view in order to be able to have these kind of be data bound and rendered in some way. Now, out of the box, you have the ability to do the title, subtitle, image, content, and then define the buttons at the bottom. But you also have full capability of doing templating that allows you to inject a little bit more into these cards. So if anything, treat these essentially as a couple of divs so you can do more or less whatever you want with them, which is pretty neat. We also have some predefined kind of views that you can take advantage of. So if you take a look at what we have here, we have just a card with some card title and some content. We have primary, info, success, error, and warning. So these are essentially predefined styles for cards. So success, of course, is full of green, and that allows you to be able to very quickly showcase this information in a positive way. And it just kind of depends on, do you want to work with what we have out of the box with a regular default card, or would you prefer to have something that's a little bit more styled to fit the particular scenario in question? So you can, of course, apply your own CSS styles on top of this if you like to, but the idea here is just to give you something out of the box that might be quicker to pick up and just have some quick configuration options for. Moving on from the card, we have the filter component, or the filter expression component. It kind of depends on how you want to talk about it. So what we have here is a quick little filter that's been set up that we say this is going to be, we're looking for information with the price. So we have a drop down for the available fields that we have is greater than or equal to, in this case, a particular value. And then we also want the name. Actually, this is sort of to be an or, I should say. So either that or the name should contain salad, for example. And we can switch that to be an and, which might make a little bit more sense in this particular sample, since we're looking for salads that might be either more expensive than $5, which I think that probably is a good safe bet. You want a little bit more money in your salad. But anyways, you have full capacity of allowing your users to go from just a little tiny box and then build out these rich expressions for filtering some sort of data source. Now, whether this data source is a grid, for example, or a list view, or whatever it might be, you can bind into the jQuery data source object, or of course your own list that you might throw in there. It 100% depends on if you want to do this with remote data or local data, but this gives the users the chance to go beyond what you might already have within some of the filter capabilities that we have within our existing components. So a great way to allow a lot of advanced functionality for users and be able to give them more power to slice and dice the data they have available within your application. And then the last component that I want to talk about before jumping into the demos is the rating widget. What that allows you to do is provide a predetermined set of values, right? Whether it's 1 through 10, 1 through 5, 5 out of 7. I know that's a pretty popular thing for folks on the internet nowadays. And it also gives you the ability to do that in half steps. So you can determine if that's going to be a quarter step or a half step or whatever it might be. But this gives us a way to, for example, have 3.5 out of 6. So that can either be done through, of course, taking the average of all the values that you've been able to collect from your users. You could also have that be available as they select over the particular item. They can see the full step or the half step within that particular rating item. You also have the ability to do templates. So we saw some stars before, right? With stars are a pretty common thing to work with, right? Especially if it's movies, for example. But you can do hearts, something a little bit more lovely. Or you could do something like we see with the demo below there with some SVG icons that allows you to do a gradient that allows you to go from red into something a little bit more neutral and yellow into maybe green or something like that, depending on what you're looking to do. So it's just a way to give some flexibility of how you provide this particular rating. Now, this can, of course, be integrated into some of our existing components or work as a standalone widget as well. So it's nice to, for example, we see this a lot with our grid. Either in edit mode, you have the ability to tweak the rating widget, or you could also just have it display whatever value you're looking for in terms of a rating of 1 through 5, let's say, and have that be permanently there without popping into edit mode. All right, and the last piece that I want to chat about before jumping into the demos is accessibility improvement. So I know this is a little bit general, and I don't necessarily have these specific big features that we address with accessibility, because overall the Kendo UI for jQuery components have been accessible for a very long time. We've always talked about Section 508 compliance, WCAG compliance, and working with YARIA, and we do a lot of work ensuring that we can work across various different screen readers, of course. So that means that whether you're using Chromevox or something else to be able to do accessibility testing, we try to be as compatible as possible. Now, of course, there are some scenarios where we're looking at the WCAG standard, they're looking at the WCAG standard, and we might have different interpretations, but we treat issues that come around with accessibility just as severely as we would anything when it's a bug in a piece of code that we wrote. So that means that throughout last release up until this release, we've done a lot of work on ensuring WCAG 2.1 compliance, for example, as well as working across issues that we've seen within our components when it comes to screen readers and just some reported issues that we've had. Now, what's nice from my side is that we've been able to see a lot more items get brought up around accessibility, at least in terms of questions. So that means, of course, that there's a continued and raised interest within the developer community to ensure that components are as accessible as possible. So just like Alyssa and I mentioned during the Angular portion of the webinar, the same thing is true for the jQuery components. So this is a big deal for us, of course, across the board. Now let me jump out of the slide deck here and jump into our live demos. So I figure that's a good way to be able to take people through kind of a tour of what we're doing within the components. So let's take a look at the timeline component. So as I mentioned, you can have the ability to do a couple of different layouts if you want to. So in this particular mode, we have the vertical, which allows us to scroll through and we can see we have up until 2009 here. And for each one of these items, we can expand and collapse it either by clicking on that little arrow there or, of course, clicking anywhere within the content. You have the ability to, for example, pop this open, and I'm just going to open this in a new tab where you can click on this button, and now you can see more information, particularly on Wikipedia. So this just happens to be within our example, but it can lead to anywhere else within your application. And I see a lot of usage for this, for example, for corporate history, right? If you want to be able to lay out some exciting things that happen within the company, or if you're just looking at, the history of, let's say, American football, and you want to be able to lay out some historical events, you have the ability to do that, and then also provide additional information through those little text boxes and the buttons below. As I mentioned, we also have the ability to do horizontal mode. So we can, if we had more data on the left-hand side, you can see that it was kind of all the way over to the left. But as we move to the right, we can see these nice slick animations that occur. So not only do these items remain open and they kind of slide over, even the top part of the overall scroller, I guess we can call it, slides over as well. So this provides a nice way to make a unique component like this really pop. And that, of course, gives a ton of interactivity and that pleasant feeling from your users that they see something and it's reacting to what they're doing. Of course, if you want to prevent that, you can, but this is just something that's out of the box. Now, in terms of how you go ahead and actually work with this, let me go ahead and quickly show you that we don't actually have too much going on in this particular demo, since this is all actually lined up with the data source that we have available. So within the Kendo timeline, you, of course, as many Kendo components, right, you do .Kendo timeline, and that opens up the ability now to do all the configuration options that you need. And in this particular case, we're actually just feeding this a list of JSON. And look at that, my PC is in saver mode, so I might need to go ahead and run and grab my power plug. But let's go ahead and jump into the card view instead, and go ahead and start with just showcasing that within the card view, really all that we've done here is provide the ability to do this through CSS. So you have the ability to take essentially a card CSS layout, right, and be able to define some predefined classes across your component. So rather than have a full widget configuration option, this gives you the ability to lay things out a little bit more semantically, work with the HTML, of course, and then just apply some CSS classes in order to be able to get up and running. And in this particular case, we have the KCard class that kicks it all off, and then we have the KCard header, as well as the KCard image, KCard body, and then we have the KCard actions, and then we can either do stretch or we can do collapsed. So this allows us to be able to easily define exactly what we want to have available within the card, and from there, of course, that gives us the flexibility to either include a section or not include a particular section. All right, and finally for the filter component, we can go ahead and see the overall, I shouldn't say final actually, because we also have the rating widget, but thank you very much to my lovely assistants, making sure that, go ahead and plug in everything so we don't lose my power here. So with the filter component, as I mentioned, you can actually start just from what we have here and hit apply, and we'll see that some new items pop into the view below. And then we can very easily and quickly go through and say, okay, I want the name to be equal to edamame, and then hit apply. Name is equal to edamame.
Spelled it
That's
right.
easy. I know, I'm proud of myself. Didn't fat finger that or anything. But you can continue to say that, okay, I also want an and in between. Now it might be a little bit tricky. So maybe instead of, we can go back to the price rate, that it's greater than or equal to $5, and then the name contains, let's just say this is going to contain an E, and see what happens. All right, so we got some seaweed salad, we got some tekkemaki. Let's see if we do
ED.
Yeah, ED, right? And we can see here that now it contains both. So it's greater than or equal to. So yeah, so the E and the seaweed, right? So anyways, an edamame is less than $5, so this kind of makes sense, right? But you can also go in and do some more intricate expressions. We can add another group and set that up as an and or, and then through there really completely slice and dice the data that you're dealing with. So I generally do a lot of filtering across some data, but this gives you so much power as an end user. And of course, all you have to do as a developer is drop this into your application. Actually, if we take a peek into this, we have a data source that we set up here. So we don't need to worry too much about what the data source actually is feeding in, but we have, you know, the schema and the model set up. So for those of you that are jQuery developers, you're familiar with this, right? And then all that we need to really do is define the data source to be equal to that data source. So the reason that we separate it out and don't have it defined within the Kendo filter is that then this same data source can be used in the list view that we have below here. And that could also then be used in the pager that we have connected to the list view, so if you have a standalone pager. So this gives you the flexibility of just through that one data source configuration, you can now share that across all your different Kendo UI components, which of course makes for a great and easy time of doing things like this, right? Having the filter then update the list view, and maybe even have some charts that you want to throw in. So it provides a ton of functionality of being able to share the data source across these components. And the last component that I want to show off is their rating widget. So as you can see here, nice and simple. Once I start interacting with it, again, we see this nice kind of slick animation happening, and hopefully that comes through through the online webinar. But you can see it fades in as I kind of remove the mouse there from items I haven't previously selected, and then it kind of just gives you, you're not just hovering over something and hoping that it's going to fill in once you click on it. There's something tactile about it. It gives your users the ability to say, oh yeah, this is something that's really I should be interacting with. You have the ability to, as I mentioned, define templates, which gives you the option to do hearts, for example, or we have this kind of gradient that is happening here, which of course can also work with tooltips. Now, how this is defined, it's pretty easy actually. So I can, let me zoom in a little bit here so we can see. So the Kendo rating, again, just like any of the other components, right? You grab the particular HTML element within, just like you would any other jQuery element, right? Called .KendoRating. And then here you have the functionality of min-max, you have value, and then you have item templates. You also have selected templates and hover templates. So what this means is that you can either do a template like we have here, which is essentially just using our Kendo UI icons that's available out of the box with Kendo UI, of course, within our CSS classes. And then here we just define, you have the KI heart outline, and then of course the selected template as well as the hover template are the same because when we hover over it, it looks and feels the same. But if we want to completely customize that and say, when I hover over it, it's going to be purple, and when I select it, it's going to be green, but when it's an actual item, it's orange. You have the full capacity of doing that by utilizing these templates. You could even go a little bit more to an advanced stage where we're now using some HTML. So you can take advantage of the Kendo UI templating functionality in order to be able to display what you want within these rating items. So that's why we have this item template here, which actually, if we scroll down a little bit, we can see how that uses the type of Kendo template, which you should be familiar with from a templating perspective. And within here, we're actually defining SVG elements that then we apply back into the rating component. So thanks to this, it gives you really any and all shapes that you can think of, whether it's something that's coming from our icon library or if it's something that you want to completely define yourself. The fact that you can throw SVG in there and define these shapes mean that really whatever you want your users to interact with from a rating perspective, you can do so. And with that, let's go ahead and see what kind of questions that we might have available. I know that a couple of you have been asking questions, so let me pop open my question screen that I know you won't be able to see.
So we have one from Twitter, if I can pass it over to you.
Oh, sure, yeah, one from Twitter.
Yeah. So Samir asked, hey, Kendo UI, for the date picker, date time picker, is there an option to only display months and set the selected value to a specific date of the month? So example, a user selects October of 2019, and the date value gets set to the last day of the month, October 31st.
So I believe that falls a little bit into actually the Angular piece, right? But what Alyssa asked there, of course, everybody could hear, which is great. So because we have this great setup now for microphones, even if you drop them on the floor, everybody else can talk. Yeah. So with that. There definitely is a capability of doing something like that. Essentially, you'd have to work with some of our events. It's not something that's out of the box as in a configuration option that says select only either the last day or the month or whatever it might be. But you do have the functionality of being able to jump in, subscribe to an event, and do some modification to the underlying value that way, which is great. And thank you, Alyssa, for covering some of the Twitter questions. We have so much going on here that I know that between Alyssa and Eric, we might have to check our phones a little bit, check out some Twitter questions that way. We do have a lot of questions actually happening around the jQuery component. So let me make sure that I can go here and check that out. So one question is, can you use a filter to build a JSON object that can then, for example, be used as a way to query anything that isn't related to the Kendo UI components? And you certainly can. So what's happening under the hood is that we're building a filter expression that, yes, it is reliant on our filter expression of, greater than, equal to, or starts with, or whatever it might be. But that filter expression is ultimately just a string, which then, of course, is JSON. So you can take that and push that out into anything that's not Kendo UI related. What we did within the demos was just showcase the power of being able to use one single data source and have that be shared across multiple different components. But that can still be used and just extract the information from the filter and then use it to your heart's content anywhere else within your application. So if you want to parse it on the client and do something like that, or the question specifically asks, can we do something with MongoDB? If you want to send something over to the server and do some querying that way, that's also possible. All right, another question is the timeline view limited to just working with dates, or can you display chapters or phases? That's a great question, and I'm honestly not 100% sure if we're able to do it outside of dates for now. However, what I do know is that thanks to some of the customization options that we have available, there are definitely ways to override some of the rendering, whether it's through configuration options and working with templates, or being a little bit clever with some CSS classes. So there might be the capacity of being able to essentially hide an element or show an element based on knowing what the CSS is. So there might be a little bit of a workaround today in order to be able to do something like that, just because the timeline, like in general, deals with time. But that still means that with those different configuration options, you can certainly take it and make it a little bit more like chapters, for example, or just milestones without necessarily having dates associated with them. So there are ways you can hide certain pieces of the dates and might be able to work with that. But that's I haven't done that personally, so take that with an asterisk next to it. But just knowing what I know about the component, as well as diving into it a little bit more, that's kind of been something that I'm pretty sure that is definitely possible.
Good question too.
It is a great question, and if it's not something that's available with this particular release, it's something that we can definitely add to the feedback portal for later, which is great. Now, does the jQuery filter allow you to use between start date and end dates? You certainly can if you want to be able to do something with dates in there. It's possible. However, I would say they might be a little bit more better off with dealing with the date pick or the date range pick, for example, depending on what you're looking to do. If you're looking to build out just the start and end date, I would say that's probably your better option in terms of components. But if you're looking to do that as a part of your overall filter expression, you can certainly tweak around a little bit with that as well and add that into the rest of the filters that you're working with. All right, what else? How can I force filter events on Kendo UI components without displaying it? So let me see if I can understand what that particular question goes into. But I think a big thing that you can do if you want to force filters without actually displaying the filter like dropdown or whatever it might be within a Kendo UI component is through working with the underlying data source. So all of our components that are data bound in some way use the Kendo UI data source. And with the Kendo UI data source, you can programmatically apply a filter to that. And that doesn't necessarily have to show up in the components. You can either do the filtering on the data source widget and then assign the data source item to those particular components that you're interested in filtering down. And then it will just automatically be filtered down. And then if you want to force another filter without displaying it, you can certainly do so. So what you could do, for example, is have the filter expression building tool as a way to display the filter, but then not display filtering in the components by just updating that data list and then by just saying, here's the new filter, or assigning, like we did in the demo, with having the data source component be bound to both the filter and the list view component, for example. Now, we do have some questions around updates to the PDF viewer, and that is definitely something that we can talk a little bit about as well. And I can actually even quickly jump into some demos, because there are some people that paid a lot of attention to this release, which is great. So we do have some updates to the PDF viewer component as well. So let me just go back to all components here. And I should be able to find the PDF viewer in here. We have so many different components. There we go. And we got the PDF viewer. I'm a little bit zoomed in as well, so let me zoom out here to see what we can take a look at here. So with this release, we also addressed a couple of items from the PDF viewer's perspective. So we did a lot of things under the hood in order to ensure that we could go through and stabilize the components since we had the first release. Overall, it was a great release, but we wanted to just make sure, of course, that we took some feedback into consideration just around ensuring that the component is as good as it can be. We also did things like, for example, zooming in and panning around within the PDF. So you'll be able to see here that I'm at 175% and trying to go through. You can have this be a little bit more of a slider if you want to, or even just do the drop downs and do, for example, fit to width or automatic width, or go into the percentages as well, so you have some flexibility there. And you also have the availability, of course, to do enabling selection and things like that. So that's already been available, but the panning and zooming has been a big aspect of what we did within the PDF viewer, as well as a couple of items in here as well, so that we're handling that scale and everything like that. So thank you for asking the question. It's definitely something that we should highlight, of course, with its release, so I appreciate that for sure. Let me go back to some of these PDF questions as well. Actually, so another PDF viewer question is around if we're going to support editing and annotation within the PDF viewer, and the answer is a solid maybe. So I would definitely recommend, as Alyssa mentioned, for the Angular components, right? Feedback.telerik.com. That's where you'll be able to go to all the feedback portals for all of our components and libraries, and beyond Kendo UI, we have, of course, the desktop and mobile components as well. But through there, you can select the jQuery library and then go ahead and submit that as some feedback. These are features that are on our mind. A tricky part about a PDF within the browser is that it's not as easy as we like it to be. So there's a lot of advanced stuff happening under the hood. So there might be a feature that seems a little bit simple up front, but we might have to dive into that a little bit. So while it's on our mind, we want to make sure that, of course, it naturally fits in the component and we can evolve the component based on your feedback. So great question, definitely submit it as feedback. All right, to make sure that we are on time, let me go ahead and jump over to the next exciting piece, which is KendoReact.
Absolutely.
So you've seen Eric stand here throughout my jQuery section, so if you've wondered who he is, he'll be able to share a screen in a second, cover a little bit more about the React-specific components that we have with this release.
So, as Carl said, I'm going to go over all of the updates and all the new components that are part of the KendoReact R3 release. My name is Eric Bouchard. I'm the developer advocate for KendoReact, and my Twitter is up on here. The first slide that I wanted to show, but I wanted to put all of the components onto one page. When I first did the first webinar for KendoReact, this page was very small. And it's been getting bigger and bigger, and with this release, we have a whole lot more components and a lot more updates. So I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at all of them in like one slide. Also, you can go over to KendoReact.com and click on the docs and demos to take a look at any of the components, and it will actually have either updated or new next to the components if they're the new ones. So after the webinar, if you want to go check that out, you'll be able to very easily tell which ones are the new ones and which are the ones that have been there. So we have several new components. The scheduler, tree list, color palette, picker, and gradient, which I'm going to kind of go over all of those and let you know what the difference is between them. The pager, and we also have some improvements with the panel bar, like an expandable mode. A couple other improvements there, and then with the grid, we have a footer row feature, which you guys already talked about a little bit, but KendoReact has the same thing. Aggregation column by column in the footer, and yeah, so just check out the documentation for that. We also have a new slider, the component that I think just hit the site in the last few days. That's the one I don't have a demo of, but I'm going to go through all the other ones for you guys. So the scheduler is really awesome, and you've seen it with some of our Angular components already. We now have it in the KendoReact, and you can do pretty much anything that you could do in like an Outlook or a Gmail calendar. You can actually edit a schedule right in place and make it recurring or make it an all-day event. So all those things that you would expect from a regular scheduler. Here's just a little animation here of kind of going in and editing one of the schedules. And this form that you're seeing also is actually a new component that is available, and you can check that out on the KendoReact docs. So they've kind of extracted the functionality of that form out into a new component. Again, another one we're not going to have a demo of, but it's something that you should definitely check out. The easiest way to kind of get started with the scheduler, I've found, is to just go and you can search with Breakfast with Tom, KendoReact, but you'll find a page that basically just walks you through adding one event to a schedule. And obviously, if you want to add more, you just have to build up that JSON or however you're feeding that data to the scheduler. But there's actually a page on the KendoReact docs that shows you how to kind of walk through binding your first piece of data. So this is definitely where I would start with if you want to, because the scheduler is massive. It's not just a small, tiny component that you can learn really quick. There's a lot of stuff in there. So start here if you're going to go and try and mess with the scheduler.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Eric. So I'm assuming that there's probably some fields that the scheduler expects, to ensure that it can display
Yep.
the data correctly. So that's what this example is doing, right? Going through and kind of just
Absolutely.
showcasing what to bind to. And
Yep, but it's also, it's also just kind of figuring out how to format that data correctly and how to kind of get that first event showing up on your scheduler. There's a lot of information there, just how to do that. And once you know how to do that, you're off to the races with the scheduler.
awesome.
Some of the supported features in the scheduler, like data binding, and actually these two slides right here are going to show several things working all in combination. So you've got data binding, editing in place, grouping, resources, and recurring events. And as you can kind of see here, as we go from kind of one slide to the next, you can just imagine that I'm clicking on one of these and opening up the event information. This specific demo that I had showing here is using all of these things right now that are starred here. So data binding, editing in place, grouping, resources, and recurring events. So you can do a lot at one time with the scheduler, or you can do just a few things at one time. So it's very versatile. The tree list view, to kind of think of it as like an alternative to the grid, the hierarchical data that you can edit in line or in cell. What you're seeing right now is actually in-line editing of the tree list, but I'll also show a demo later where you can actually just double-click on the person's name or maybe on their position and edit right inside the cell. So there's different modes of how you can use the tree list component. So the color palette is one of several new components, and the way that I like to think about these is that your color palette is going to get loaded into like your color picker. Also, we have a gradient that you can load into a color picker as well. The color palette is basically your set of a bunch of different colors that you want to give the user the ability to switch between. And you can wrap those up into a nice color picker. So I showed the color palette first because if you look here at the animation that I've got going, we have a color palette on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side that I'm interacting with right now, that's a color picker. When you create a color picker, you're either loading a color palette into it or a gradient tool into it. If you're ever just looking for the actual set of icons that you need just for colors, you're going with the color palette, not the color picker. One of the things I wanted to show you is how they're achieving this demo here is they've got the Kendo UI guy, and they've made parts of his image transparent. And what we do is we set a div behind that character, and we're setting the background to that div with whatever color we're picking. So if you can imagine kind of you have this thing inside of Photoshop or whatever, and you just kind of cut out all these pieces here. And then when we layer that over a div, you get this nice little animation where when you change the colors, it's changing out the colors of his outfits. And you'll see this with some of the other color demos that we have, like the gradient. Again, same thing, you've got the motorcycle, you've got certain parts of it that are transparent, and there's a layer behind of it. You can actually, there's a nice smooth gradient that you can select. You can select alpha. You can actually type in the hex or the RGBA values individually. And yeah, actually I was using this the other day to convert hex over to RGBA because I didn't have anything else and I already had it open. So I was like, yeah, that works pretty good.
It's a nice, clever trick too to get some interactivity into images.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did not even think about that. So it's fun that you found out the.
Yeah, I mean, basically just go in there, start
yeah.
cutting things out, and then you overlay it over a div, and you've got the ability to change the color of something, which is pretty cool. Another new component is the pager. We've had the ability to use the pager before, but we didn't have the ability to just kind of rip that pager out and use it on anything. So what you're seeing here is it's a contrived example, which we have a bunch of options that you can select, and it will either add or remove things from your pager bar. And then in one of the demos that I've set up, I actually just bound a list up to it. So again, before we used to have this in conjunction with the grid, right? And now I can just have any old list on the page and bind the pager to it, and yeah, so I get the functionality of that pager all by itself. The grid, also updated, and we talked about this already. You have the ability to aggregate things, which you've always been able to do, but now we've got this nice little footer row at the bottom that you can add, and it's super easy to set up. Again, I'll have better demos of all these in just a moment. All the things that I'm going to show you in the demo are going to be at this address right here, and I'll show this one more time at the end. Basically, at this address, we've got a demo that I'm going to put up, which is on my GitHub, and a bunch of links to all of these demos on StackBlitz as well. So demo time. The slide that I showed before with the link on it, there is going to be a demo there, and I want to go ahead and tell everyone that we went ahead and set up one of the big things in React lately, if you're working with React, is the ability to use hooks in your application. So some of our demos are set up with hooks, and some of them aren't. So one of the things that we've done for you is all of the demos that we've been showing you and that are on the docs that we're about to show you. We went ahead and put those all into one little nice app. It's all functional components and it's all hooks. So if someone's looking at our components and they're wondering, well, how can I do this and set up with a functional component and a hook? We've got that all put together for you, and I'll show that slide again before we check
perfect.
out.
Yeah, with the hooks, I know that not everybody in the React community is using hooks actively, right? It's a new and exciting thing, and a lot of people are moving towards it. But
yeah, I mean,
there's still a lot of functional components being written. So we try to represent that within our documentation as well, right?
Yeah.
Allowing to have a
the
little
documentation
bit of
is being
hooks.
updated every once in a while. You'll run across one that's not done with hooks, but again, that's why we've been setting up this demo so that you guys can have access to all those components written with hooks.
Perfect.
So the first one we probably want to go to is let's go to the color picker.
Let's go to the color picker.
Actually, go color palette first.
Sure thing. And you can actually
Yeah.
feel free to take over completely. I'll just step over here behind you.
All right, our awesome picture here. Remember, again, that just an image overlaying a div, which you see right here, description, this div class image. And basically, we're setting the background color to the actual color that you're picking from the color palette. Now, the color palette is set up to work with in a controlled state. So if you're using the value and the on change down here, you're going to always have access to whatever the current selected color is. And on change, you can do whatever you want to do. So we have this on change down here. And basically, every time that you change the color, we're going to take that value and set the state and basically to that new color. So that's one demo for you. And we'll go now over to the color picker. And we don't need to open this one up in StackBlitz, but as you can see here, you have the ability to kind of have just a regular palette set up, and we've got a lot of palette presets already set up for you. And let's go ahead and take a look at those real quick. And if we go to color palette presets, so you can use any of these presets here just by basically using these keywords here: Office, Apex, Austin, Clarity. And you can also create your own color palettes, so custom color palettes. We've got presets for you. And then if we go back to our color picker, one of the cool things is that you can have a color picker that just uses those presets, or you can also do a custom color picker. So let me scroll down here and show you some of the different options that we have. So you've got a gradient pop-up. So this is very similar to the gradient tool that you guys already saw, but what it's being done is it's being loaded inside of the color picker. And we actually have the alpha turned off right here, and so that you just have the ability to select a gradient. And another cool thing is that you can use the Kendo UI icons or display your own custom icons. Now these both look the same, but this one here is using, this icon here is a Kendo UI, whereas down here is probably, I didn't check, but it's probably like Font Awesome or something. The next one we want to take a look at, let's go back to the docs and demos real quick. So the pager component, this is my favorite one. The one thing I wanted to kind of tell you about this is that if you were to open this up in code, and you'll be able to go to that demo and check it out, is that it's very easy to just take a list and bind it to one of these pagers. You've always got the concept of skip, total, skip, and take, right? So anytime you're dealing with a pager, you're dealing with the concept of, hey, I've got a total number of items in it, and I've got a amount that I want it to skip and amount that I want to take. So by basically just taking that total and then taking the skip minus take, I think, would give you a number, and then you can put those into a regular slice function, and now you've got the ability to kind of incrementally move through a data set using your your pager. If you go and download that demo, you're going to be able to see exactly how we do all that. And I've just got a basic unordered list that's hooked up to it that makes it really easy to just see, okay, I see how to use the pager here in the demo, but I also want to see like a live version working with a list using functional components and hooks and everything. So that's what we try to create for you there.
Yeah, what's nice about this too is that while of course we use this within some of our components, now the standalone, these kind of methodologies, right, they can be used with any other components, and it can also help work with if you have items on the server side, right? So you
Yep.
can now take this, like you said, either slice it in an array that you have locally,
Yep.
or if you want to push that out into the server, grab some data and just make your server request smaller. It's a great and nifty way to just have a natural user experience for users to work with a larger data set without having to pull all the data onto the client.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and look at the slider. So this one, just going to show it real quick. It's nice to be able to see kind of what it is here. So it's a very simple slider. You can take it, grab it, and move it around, which you can kind of place it anywhere, or you can incrementally go with the buttons and get to the next step. New component that came out with this release, and the grid. So the reason why I wanted to open up this one is because I just wanted to be able to show exactly how we did the footer. So we should have a demo in here.
Yeah, the footer cells.
Here we go. So let's open this up in Stackblitz real quick, just to show you how to do this. All right, so as you can see over here, we have these aggregates. We have a minimum and a maximum, which is basically just so the minimum is 2.5. So if we scrolled through this list of data, one of these would have a unit price of 2.5, and one would have a much larger price. And then we've got a total here. So let's go take a look at how we're doing this. So here, we're actually taking the, we've got a couple of different reduce methods that are creating the min and max and the totals. And then we've got these all just kind of wrapped up into their own little function. And if we double click on this guy, we can see here that it's being used down here. So all we're doing is going in and saying footer cell, and then we're linking to this function up here. And that's taking all that information and kind of wrapping it up and creating like an aggregate for you, and it's allowing you to display it into the footer. So it's very simple to use. You know, this part up here is kind of hard to figure out at first, but that's why we have some good examples. But when it comes to like actually just linking to it and kind of adding it to the component, it's super easy.
What's nice, of course, is that because you can completely customize what's being displayed here, we just happen to throw it into a TD element, right?
Yeah.
It means that you could really throw anything you want in there. So whether it's aggregate information or a true footer information, or if you just want to throw in a custom message or whatever it might be, you have full capacity of customizing this completely. I mean, you're completely in control of what you return here and what gets displayed ultimately in the cell.
Point.
Of course, it is a cell, so maybe it's a little bit easier to have it be a TD element, right? And work with some of the styles that we have out of the box. But you can even say, let's not do that and do my own thing, right?
I'd also assume that if you've kind of had any experience working with the grid before and kind of customizing those cells, that this is gonna be very easy for you to work with.
Very similar to how you can customize existing cells both in edit and in read mode. So there's a lot of commonality here. So it's essentially just another cell that you can customize that happens to be in the footer.
Absolutely. I want to be able to show how you can do the cell versus the actual inline. So let me just go down here real quick, take one moment. If we go to editing and we go to inline, let's open that up in one, and we'll open up in cell in another one. These are the two that I kind of wanted to show side by side and how they're different. And we don't actually have to open anything up. We'll just go ahead and kind of show. So we edit. So we can do an edit and actually edit inline. So when they're talking about inline versus in cell, you usually have some type of a button to click to do an inline, and it just opens up the entire row of information as kind of like a form, like an inline form. However, my favorite one is this one here, the in cell. So you can literally just click wherever you want to in the page and just say, you know, software guy, right? And then click here and you've got a little checkbox. Like this is how people, I used to build inventory systems for like an auto manufacturer, and these are the types of things that we would try to do, and it just took us so long to be able to figure this stuff out. And I mean, basically, if we open this up in Stackblitz, you'll see that this is just whether you're editing it in line or you're in cell. You're just changing a couple of parameters on the actual component. So let's look it up. So here's the tree list toolbar and the tree list up here. So we've got a cell render and a row render, and so if we try and click on this guy, can I do Control D in here? No. It's not like Visual Studio Code. Anyways.
It's close, but not quite
So
there.
you know, we're hopping around and kind of trying to find out, you know, where the function is for the cell render. But if you were to open these up in Visual Studio Code right next to each other and kind of look at one versus the other, they're very, very easy to figure out. Okay, this is how you do the cell versus the inline. Those are the two that I would probably work with the most out of these. Also, you can just display it without having any editing at all and just do a very basic tree list. And in that case, you don't have any of this extra code here. You just basically, you're using the tree list component and you're binding some data to it, and you have this nice hierarchical view there. But I really like all the different editing capabilities that they've built into this. So you know, out of the components that we have, the scheduler and this tree list, they just kind of blow my mind as how deep they went with these and kind of all the different functionality that you can do. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about that.
Yeah, perfect. And I know, just checking some time, I think it's high time that we cover some questions as well for what we've had in your section. So, of course, one component that we ended up not highlighting here, but you saw a good couple GIFs of, as well as a couple of images, is a scheduler component, which if you're familiar with the scheduler from any one of our other suites, it's you're looking at, you know, very similar functionality. And if you're new to KendoReact and the scheduler in general, think about Outlook Calendar or Google Calendar, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
So one question that I saw that pop over was somebody asked us what kind of machines we have going on here. So I don't know if you
Lenovo P52S, which I like a whole lot. It's I've grown to love it. It never messes up.
Perfect. And from my side, I'm using the Surface Book Pro. So yeah, Surface Book Pro, right? That's what the name of it is too. And through there, added a sticker on top of it, you know, to make it look a little bit nice. All right, so we had a couple of different questions pop through here. One of them, actually, since we covered a lot of different products, this isn't just React specific, but someone asked, you know, are we looking to support one of these frameworks more than the other? And my answer to that is no. I love all my children equally, and we do so as well within Kendo UI as a whole. So we have the jQuery components, the React components, the Angular components, and even the Vue components are all near and dear to our hearts, and we're not focusing on one more than the other. They all might be in a little bit of different stages of maturity, but that just comes from the fact that, you know, we're building these libraries from the ground up, and we're creating teams around them, and depending on where they are in their lifespan, there might be a couple of more components that get introduced here and there. All right, let's see what else that we, so some other questions that pop through here. We have some Hey Kendo UI questions here, actually. Let me see if we can see any good questions here. So someone asked about if the React scheduler compares to the Daypilot React scheduler, and that's a great question, actually. I'd have to dive in a little bit more into that for you, and I'll follow up on that on Twitter, actually, just to double check what is available within the Daypilot React scheduler, just to see what kind of the breakdown that we have there, of course. Somebody asked, what is the difference between KendoReact and Kendo UI? That's a great question. So, and the reason being that, you know, we have all these different JavaScript flavors that we're targeting, right? So whether it be jQuery, which Kendo UI originally came from, Angular, React, or Vue, what we're doing within each one of those technologies is that we're building something from the ground up. So in order to differentiate a little bit between Kendo UI and what we offer in the jQuery side, as well as Angular and the other products, we have KendoReact. So that's specifically what we're targeting for React developers with these native React components. And you'll see similar things on the Angular side, Vue, and jQuery. So it's just kind of a branding thing to ensure that you can understand that this is specifically for React. You of course have the overall Kendo UI product family, which then includes everything that you might need under the sun for JavaScript development. Depending on if you're on a team that works with multiple frameworks or different technologies, you have that as well. Just making sure, I know a lot of our helpers online have helped with a lot of these questions. So, but one question that did come through again is if this is going to be recorded. Yes, everything that we have here is actively being recorded and will be up on YouTube in the next day or so. So you should be able to catch up on this, go to your favorite section, and be able to dive into this a little bit more if you want to. We're running close here, so I'm just going to jump back into the slide deck to make sure that we cover everything. But I wanted to quickly highlight the Kendo UI roadmap. So we mentioned this a little bit in all the different sections, really. And what I can recommend is going online and checking out the roadmap. So if you go to KendoUI.com or TelleriaX.com/KendoUI, you'll be able to go to an overall roadmap for all the products. You also have the ability to jump into each individual specific product and check out their roadmap. But things, for example, to look out for on the horizon is covering the same order that we did here. In the Angular space, we're looking to introduce the treeless component there as well. Going to do an initial version of the component that will, of course, continue to evolve. So that's a big, huge component that I know a lot of folks are looking for. On the jQuery side of things, we're looking into rounding out a couple of components that come from the feedback portal. One of them actually being a file manager component, which we'll be able to provide more details of going forward, and you'll be able to see that online, what that entails. But I know a lot of people have been looking for a file manager, so be on the lookout for that. Then on the React side, we'll continue to evolve the components and ensure that we have a fit with the jQuery components, essentially, because that's a good list for us to kind of refer back to. So we have more enhancements coming to the tree list, as Eric mentioned. The tree list combines kind of a hierarchical structure with a grid structure. So we have some catching up there to do with terms of grid features of functionality. So we're adding that in, and a couple of other components that we'll be able to take a look at. And then I know that we didn't cover Vue during this webinar. We've kind of stepped back in the last couple months and done a lot of chatting with our Vue developers to seeing how we can best enable them with the components. Of course, we have something that we're building from the ground up there as well, and we'll be able to share more news about this, but more native components are coming to Vue over the next couple months. So if you're a Vue developer and looking to see outside of what we did with jQuery, of course, with the wrap components, what's available for you, we'll have very exciting news coming out, especially with the next release webinar, but even before then, you'll be able to see these new native Vue components come out. So ton of more stuff coming out for Kendo UI. And kind of as a final note here, again, if you have any and all questions around any of these components, right, you can either double check and see our online demos by going to TelleriaX.com/KendoUI, or you still have the hashtag HeyKendoUI Twitter hashtag, right? Yep. You also have the ability to reach out to me, Eric, or Alyssa through Twitter as well. And of course, you have the @KendoUI handle and everything like that. And then the lovely feedback portal, the family photo of everybody together here. So we appreciate everybody's time. I think that we might be just a minute or two over now, but I appreciate everybody coming in, joining us today. Some of you stuck through the entire presentation, so you are just full of information, but hopefully you found something useful with the R3 2019 webinar, and we'll catch everybody in the next webinar, of course.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
And they can check out my Twitter for all the demos.
Perfect.
Bye.
Bye.